at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to succumb to marketing than to educate consumers, and assuming that consumers want to be educated. And I don't know if a lot of them do, or, you know, some of them do. I do think that brands need to be better about educating, but at the same time, science is not sexy. It's hard to make science sound really cool and want you to spend your money on it.
Ava Perkins is a nationally recognized cosmetic chemist and science educator, with her bachelor's degree in cosmetic science, also graduating as valedictorian. She's currently pursuing her PhD in biomembrane sciences. She formulates over 50 types of cosmetic, personal care, and pharmaceutical products, including skincare, hair care, sun care, color cosmetics, and more. And like me, it's really her goal to bridge the gap between the consumer and the industry. If you've seen her content, you know that she is an expert myth buster, so that's exactly what we're going to do today. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the myth busting. Ava, thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with us today. You are like really a wealth of knowledge. I really enjoy your content on social media, so I'm excited for you to like bust some myths for us.
No, thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Okay, so I like to start every episode asking my guest, what is your first skincare memory?
Y'all are literally gonna hate me for this one. My first skincare memory was back in middle school, and I think I was like sick at home one day. I was watching America's Next Top Model, and I really had no knowledge about skincare. And so I just Googled like DIY face mask or whatever, and just using whatever I had in the pantry, and then we just had like baking soda. And so I made like a baking soda paste and put it all over my face and totally wrecked my skin barrier. My skin was like super irritated and dry afterwards. But that was like also the time I feel like when people were like, oh, if it's burning, it's working. So my first skincare memory is just completely wrecking my skin barrier. Obviously, I've come a long way since then.
Yeah, you've definitely learned since then. That's for sure. So for those who maybe aren't really sure what a cosmetic chemist is, how you become one, can you tell us a little bit about your career journey? How did you become a cosmetic chemist? And at what age did you figure out, number one, what that even is, and two, that you wanted to do it?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people don't know about cosmetic science or, you know, cosmetic chemists in general. They just kind of assume things make the shelves, and that was me. Like up until college, I was actually, I think, like 19 or 20 until I figured out what cosmetic science was. And I actually didn't discover it until the pandemic happened. I was playing water polo at the University of Hawaii. I was studying chemistry there, and COVID cut our season short. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? You know, like the NBA isn't even a thing anymore. And I, you know, went home, and my dad was just like, you should become a cosmetic chemist. Like, you're really into chemistry. That's what I was studying at the time. And I was just really into makeup personally. And I was just like, at that time, like, of course, like, oh no, dad, like, I want to do real science, because, you know, everyone assumes that cosmetic chemists only like mix colors in the lab or something like that. And so I had Googled, you know, how to become a cosmetic chemist, and the University of Toledo popped up, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is like an actual thing. Like there's an actual education that you can get in it too. And so I had looked further into it, and I had actually transferred from the University of Hawaii. I had moved from Hawaii to Toledo, Ohio, which is like in the middle of nowhere, and had one of the best experiences ever. Like it's one of those things where it's like you found your passion, and that has definitely been the case for me. So I guess I figured it out kind of, I guess, like later in my collegiate time, but I would say my path is a little bit more straightforward than most, though. At least people who've been in the industry for, you know, decades, they either majored in chemistry or biology or biochem, and that's totally still relevant now. But, you know, they found their way into the industry just by, you know, chance or something, and never left, because, like, why would you leave the cosmetic industry? It's so awesome. And yeah, I would say my pathway is a little bit more straightforward than them. Like, I actually have like a formal education in cosmetic science. But yeah, that's kind of my path. And I think my path is probably going to start to be more common as cosmetic science education grows, which is definitely the case. Programs are popping up everywhere.
I think so. And I don't think I ever told you this, but I'm actually from Ohio.
Oh, no way! What part?
I'm actually from Akron, but I did my undergrad at UC.
Oh, no way!
I got my biology degree from UC, yeah. So I was thinking about it. I'm like, we probably have worked in a lot of the same labs, because obviously for biology, you have to do a lot of chem and OChem and all that stuff. So,
that's so
I was laughing
funny
when I was reading your bio.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I'm getting my PhD at UC right now, but, you know, I went to Toledo for undergrad.
I saw. Yeah, that's so cool.
How
Amazing.
funny.
Yeah. So As someone, as a science educator online, what frustrates you the most about the skincare community online?
That's a great question. I think the thing that frustrates me the most is that like anyone could be a self-proclaimed expert nowadays, and they kind of use that to their advantage, and they could potentially be spreading misinformation. And depending on the creator, or depending like what degrees that they have to, might be more inclined to believe others, even if it's not true at all. So I just find it very frustrating that there's not like a unified front on like debunking things, or just being able to provide accurate education online. It's really frustrating having to debunk other professionals in the field. Like, y'all should be doing your due diligence. Like, what are we doing here? It should not be about the clicks, but not everyone has that intention.
Yeah, and then also I think, there's a lack of this notion that if you're corrected, it's okay to say, I learned something new, or I dug a little bit deeper in the research and realized what I said wasn't entirely accurate, and this is the accurate science. But it just seems like that doesn't really happen.
No, absolutely. People get very defensive. And I don't know, for me, I find it more respectable if somebody comes forward and says, oops, I was wrong. Like, here's how I learned from it, and here's the correct information. I feel like that's actually going to be received a lot better than people doubling or tripling or quadrupling down on incorrect information. You're just losing a lot of trust.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's what science is, right? Science is very nuanced, and there are hundreds of studies, and not all of them are the most accurate or the most high quality studies. So when you take more of a kind of bird's eye view of something, you might see it one way, but when you dig deeper, you might see something entirely different, and you have to be able to adjust and not be too proud to say when you've maybe spread misinformation unknowingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the whole peer review process of getting things published is looked at by other people and critiqued by other people. It's the same thing online. So I think it's crazy though, that just the difference in, things being received. It's some people are just totally defensive like that. It's wild.
Yeah, I agree. So speaking of myths, I wanted to have you on today because I really want to go through some of the most common myths that we see on social media and hear from your expert opinion, your thoughts on them. What does the science say about it? So I'm just going to list them off for you.
Okay.
Okay. So the first one is that our skin absorbs 80% of what we apply to it.
Y'all, this one is crazy to me, especially because like a lot of what my PhD is in skin and how things interact with the skin and the hair. This is absolutely not true. That would be absolutely crazy if things absorbed 80% into your skin, or, reached your bloodstream like that. I don't feel like people understand that the skin barrier is a barrier and the whole purpose of your skin is to protect you from the external environment. And there are so many things that can impact, a product even penetrating into the skin, let alone permeating down to the bottom layers and down into your bloodstream. Things like, how soluble the product is, even like the wind outside can impact like how things are going to penetrate or permeate to your skin. And yeah, in general, cosmetics are not meant to do that. They're not drugs, and so they're formulated with a lot of intention. And so the notion that things absorb 80% to your skin is like absolutely wild. Like we strive for that, like in drug formulation, that is something that we work really hard towards. So it's totally not true.
I think it's one of those like pervasive myths that you just see over and over, especially in certain communities. It's like I can like picture the generic reel in my head, like 80% of what your skin is your largest organ, like all that whole rhetoric. It's so funny.
It's crazy.
Next myth, is self-tanner bad for you?
No, especially in comparison to getting a tan from sun exposure. Self-tanners are much, much better. So basically, like the way that self-tanners work is that they have their active ingredient called DHA, or dihydroxyacetone. It basically works by reacting with like the top layer of your skin. It's called like the Maillard or the Maillard reaction. I'm still not sure like which one is the correct pronunciation. But
I know.
You know what? It reacts with like the top layer of your skin, the amino acids and the proteins. It kind of like makes your skin a brown, sometimes orangey color. It's the same reaction that occurs when you caramelize sugar, when you brown bread, when you grill meat. It's that same reaction, and it's temporary, and it goes away as your skin sheds it. That's why fading might be uneven or things like that. I will say the only thing that I have heard about not DHA, well, I guess DHA, but self tanners in general being unsafe is, if you get a spray tan and potentially inhale it, that could be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But typically, if you go see like a spray tan artist, or if you hopefully go to a place where they, give spray tans, they should give you like nose plugs or things to prevent that. But getting a tan from self tanners is much, much safer than from sun exposure, like 1,000%.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, this reaction is happening on that very, very top surface layer of your skin cells, where those skin cells are already quote unquote dead. Because I can just hear the people now saying like, well, I don't want to grill like a piece of meat. Like, that's not what's happening to any other cell except that very top layer that's going to flake off in a few days anyway.
Exactly. Yes.
It's so funny. Okay, so next one, naturally derived ingredients are better for us.
That is not true either. And, I appreciate, wanting to be more in tune with nature, or potentially be even more sustainable. However, I feel like people also don't put into perspective that naturally derived ingredients are naturally derived. And so there's a lot of factors that could go into like the safety or the quality of the ingredient, where the product is sourced from, the time of year, whether the weather was good that year or not. And so there's actually a lot more inconsistencies with natural ingredients as compared to synthetic ones. And they could also be potentially irritating too. I feel like when people think of like naturally derived, like they don't consider that like poison ivy is technically natural too, but it's not necessarily like better for you. So it's actually really challenging to formulate with natural ingredients to begin with, because just like their quality varies so much. And if that's your thing, go ahead, like use natural derived ingredients, all good, but don't, push the narrative that they are better, or like, people who use like chemicals or synthetic chemicals, that's bad for you, when that's just not the case at all.
What are your thoughts from a formulation perspective on lab engineered natural ingredients? Are they easier to work with? Do you like working with them, or do you see kind of the same issues?
That's a great question. Do you have any like specific ones like that you had in
No.
mind? Okay.
I'm just thinking of brands who that's like the kind of stance that they take, that they use lab engineered natural ingredients. And I'm always curious, like from a chemist perspective, what the thought is on that. I guess it would depend on the ingredient.
I think it would depend on the ingredient, but I still think it like pertains to, if something is synthetically derived, it usually has a chemical reaction laid out, and there isn't as much variability. But yeah, I still think it might be a little bit easier, but yeah, natural.
But probably not as easy to predict then. Okay.
Yeah, it really depends.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so next myth is that products with fragrance are bad for us, for our health, or bad for our skin.
That is also not true. There's a lot of people out there that, saying fragrance in general is bad, and that's like a very like blanket statement.
Yes.
Also, just like the fact that people love to say that, like fragrance on an ingredient label means there's like hundreds to thousands to tens thousands of ingredients in that, like, one fragrance itself.
Under that umbrella,
under that
yes.
name. Yeah, which is true, and that's mostly for proprietary reasons. Companies don't want to be sharing how they made their fragrances, which I get. Like, that's a little bit frustrating as a consumer to see, but also like, how are you going to put all those ingredients on an ingredient label? Like, there's just not enough room. But also to put something into perspective too, like fragrances are not used at a high percentage in cosmetic products at all, like less than one, like much less than 1%. And so, all those hundreds to tens of thousands of ingredients are even at such a minute percentage in the actual formulation. And also just the fact that we don't use as much skincare ingredients either. It's just like, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say as a blanket statement that fragrances in general are bad for your health or harmful for you. I will say, though, there are people that are sensitive or that are allergic to certain fragrance ingredients, and, companies should be disclosing those, irritating fragrance ingredients, and especially with some new regulations coming into play, like MOCRA. I don't know if you've heard of MOCRA before. MOCRA is basically new regulation that's been put into effect and will still be put into effect over the next few years. That really kind of holds like mostly, I think, indie brands or smaller brands accountable in terms of like saying what's in their products. And I believe disclosing some irritating fragrances will be a part of that. They still haven't like laid out everything that is going to be part of that. It'll be phased out within the next few years. Companies should be, saying disclosing those things, but I think in general to say that a blanket statement like fragrance is bad is just not true. And also, sorry, I can yap forever. Also, just to add, like things like essential oils are technically fragrance, but could be irritating. But people love to say that essential oils would be better for you. So it just really is. If you are sensitive or allergic to fragrance, don't use it. But that's not to say that everyone is going to experience that.
And speaking of fragrance, can you kind of give us the difference between unscented and fragrance-free? Because those are two terms that are kind of thrown around interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely not interchangeable. And this is kind of tricky because neither of them are regulated by the FDA technically. And so brands can kind of word things a little tricky. So they might sound the same or maybe not. But essentially, unscented does not mean fragrance-free in that they can add fragrance ingredients. It's not like the same thing that we had talked about where it's like hundreds to tens of thousands of ingredients. It might be, a few, to more so mask an odor that would come from a skincare product to make it smell as like nothing as possible. So it's like it's purely functional. As for fragrance free, it should not have any fragrance in there, but then that also goes to say like you could have something an ingredient that has a fragrance to it, but it's not technically that fragrance umbrella term. So scented and fragrance free are not necessarily the same thing, but again, they're not really regulated either. So it's a little bit tricky to navigate.
Yeah, this just made me think of how funny it is. I think sometimes when brands can't really win, because so many times now brands will formulate without fragrance because that's what the consumer wants, but then they get complaints that their products smell so bad, and like I can't even let it touch my face because it stinks so bad. And it's so funny because I like fragrance, but I don't like it to overpower my skincare just because it tends to like feel uncomfortable for me. Like it kind of gives me a headache if my products are too fragrant. And I always joke, like, I'd much rather just smell whatever the regular ingredients smell like. And I get comments all the time. I'm thinking, like, specifically of a couple products that I've, like, talked about that I love, mostly cosmetic products, and people being like, oh, but how can you possibly get past the smell? And one of the physicians I work with, she has a friend, and she says she always words it like, it smells like science. And I'm like, I love that. Like, you're smelling the actual ingredients. It smells like science. It's so funny.
Yeah, I know there's definitely some ingredients like ferulic acid. People said it smells like hot dog water. I've never like heard of that until like consumers said that, but I think that's hilarious. Like,
and it is fascinating how everyone's sense of smell is different because like I do when someone brings it to my attention, I'm like, oh, I guess I do smell that, but like I just don't think about it. It never really crosses my mind.
No, it smells like science.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Next myth is that we need toners to tone our skin after cleansing because cleansing is disrupting the pH of the skin.
No, that is not true either. And I feel like this myth is really using what toners were back like decades ago, because cleansers were totally different decades ago too. Cleansers were a lot more harsh and would use like harsher water. So the whole idea of toners would be to kind of like fix what like after like post cleanse, using a more of a lye based soap, which is higher in pH, or again using a harder water. But cleansers are formulated a lot more different these days to be a lot more gentle. They shouldn't have that like stripped down feeling, and so toners are totally not necessary. And I don't necessarily feel like the education has really gone up to par with how cleansers have changed over time either. Like I've seen a lot of like, oh, it's going to like readjust your skin's pH, when in reality your skin is very well regulated. Like we're not just going to throw something on and it's going to completely change your pH entirely, or at least like it's going to be negligible. So I mean, if you like to use a toner, go ahead, but don't think that it's going to like neutralize or tone your pH, because that's just like not true. There's also so many different toners out there too. There's some with BHAs, there's some with AHAs, there's some that are more hydrating, some that are like essence. Like it's so confusing. Even like as a cosmetic chemist, I'm just like, what are we actually making here? Because there's just the marketing is just crazy all over the place, and toner is very much like a blanket term for so many different types of formulations.
Whenever someone asks like, do I need a toner? Should I use a toner? I'm like, that is like the most empty question you could possibly ask. I'm like, I always tell people, think of a toner like a vehicle, like just you would a serum. It depends on what's in the toner. Is it solving a concern that you have, then yeah, maybe it's going to be beneficial. But it's just another step in the skincare routine that could potentially impart beneficial ingredients. It's not that you need that specific type of product. You can get the same benefits from a similar serum if you wanted. It's just preference.
Absolutely. 100%.
So interesting. Okay, next one. Castor oil will promote lash growth.
I don't think I've seen enough evidence to support that. I think all the evidence I've seen has been anecdotal. It hasn't been getting information from Reddit is not I have to say this is scientifically true. I think it might be able to provide some moisturizing benefits potentially to your lashes, but I don't know if that's really entirely necessary either. So again, one of those things, if you want to, go ahead, but I don't think it's going to solve all your problems and make your eyelashes grow tremendously. I don't know. Yeah.
And what do you think about lash serums in general? Where do you stand on the prostaglandin analog issue?
I honestly don't use lash serums. I think for that reason. Sometimes, cosmetics or even drug OTC cosmetics are formulated a little bit not sneaky, but using sunscreens, for example, there's those sneaky UV filters. It's kind of the same thing with lash serums, but also I am just not really a fan of the consequences that have been from using lash serums with prostaglandin analogs. So it's just really not for me. Proceed with your own risk, but
yeah, I mean, many of the really drugs that we use, not usually in cosmetic products, there are risks. And I think the issue with these came that these risks were now coming from a cosmetic formulation, right? Without any guidance, without any warning, all of that stuff. And actually, I'm not going to name any names, but I have posted about lash serums before because I actually had some lipodystrophy from a lash serum years ago. And so I've posted PSAs about just understanding the risks when you're using one. And a brand that was on the list of the ones that I mentioned that included PGAs sent me their study, and I just want to hear what you think of it from a science perspective. And they said that their lash serum was proven not to have this side effect because they had a study of 120 people use it for, I think it was 8 weeks or something. And I'm thinking 120 people is an incredibly small sample size, and 8 weeks is not very long. So I just did an email back. I'm like, that really doesn't prove anything, but I understand what you're trying to do there. I appreciate that the brand is investing in this small study, but it really doesn't tell me much.
Yeah, no, just hearing what you said just now, from a clinical studies perspective, 120 subjects is actually really great, but in proving that it's not going to have a drug consequence, that is not enough at all. You definitely need a lot more people, and using it for 2 months, I would argue, is definitely not enough time either. Your hair grows pretty slowly, so I would, want to use that at least over a span of 6 months to a year, let alone, I really don't think that's yikes.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I understand what they're doing, but in my opinion, then I just think reformulate without the PGA, but then it's not as effective, right? I mean, that's just the reality. But I think just own up to the ingredients and their potential side effects. And the fact is that many people will still use them knowing the side effects, just like people use Latisse and they get the package insert. They understand or hopefully understand the side effects. So it's a very, very interesting, very interesting topic. This episode is brought to you by, me. Skinthusiast.com is your one-stop shop for all things skin, hair, and beauty. I have countless blog posts to educate you on all the skin concerns and most common skin questions I receive. We also have a complete skincare basics guide on our shop page, as well as the cutest In My Skin era crew necks. If you want to support the show, please head over to skinthusiast.com/shop, and don't forget to rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Some sunscreen filters cause cancer.
This is another really challenging topic, and I have been doing research in sunscreens probably for the last 2-ish years, at least in an academic setting, and I don't think that the amount of studies that are out there talking about, it being an endocrine disruptor or potentially could be carcinogenic or bad for the coral reefs or whatever, I don't think there's enough evidence to warrant the amount of panic that has come from it, and the amount of also like regulation that have come from it too. Like in Maui, you can't sell chemical sunscreens at all. It's only mineral. And it kind of creates this like ripple effect of, you know, sunscreens aren't safe or sunscreens are causing you cancer, when in reality it's UV radiation. Like the risk to benefit ratio, you are much more likely to get cancer from the sun than your sunscreen products. And also just like the fact too that like consumers do not wear enough sunscreen in general, like daily within a single use. They just don't use enough for, I think, them to freak out about it anyways. And the studies that I have seen have been, you know, either on animal studies, or they use the UV filters in just the single UV filter itself at a really high dosage. And that's just not realistic to consumer use. And that's like one of the things that's just been driving me crazy lately, is people that send me studies or whatever. I'm like, okay, but this isn't applicable to consumer use. This isn't in the final formulation. Right. This isn't at a realistic dose. Like, this does not matter. And so it's one of those things where it's like, use the sunscreen that you will use. You know, people ask me all the time, is chemical better, is mineral better? Use the one that you will use, but just know that both are safe. And also, I guess, to put into perspective too, is on a regulation side, at least the chemical and the mineral UV filters that are out there right now, they're categorized into 3 categories. There's grays, there is not grays, and needs more information. Do you know anything about this? Okay,
yes,
perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Generally regarded as safe, right?
Safe and...
You can explain a little bit to the audience.
Yeah. So grays is generally regarded as safe and effective. And basically they do this with a lot of cosmetic ingredients, but especially for like OTC, which is what, or over-the-counter drugs, which is what UV filters are. And so titanium dioxide and zinc oxide are considered grays, so they are in category 1. There are a few UV filters, chemical UV filters, that are in non-grays. They are not sold over the counter. They are not, you can't find them anywhere anymore, hopefully. And then there's the 3rd category, which is just needs more testing. And I feel like people see the like, oh, just needs more testing as like, oh my gosh, this is unsafe and I am going to die, and why are they still selling this over the counter? Like, this is crazy. When in reality, we've been using these for decades, and there's a lot of studies that support their safety and efficacy, but there just needs to be more data in general. So I can go on all day about this.
Yeah, and I think it's frustrating too, like you said, when the legislature kind of jumps the gun, because then it just reinforces this public fear when in reality it's unfounded. Actually, I had Ron Robinson on the show, and we were talking about how now, from a formulation perspective, he was saying, you know, there are things that we used to formulate with back 20 years ago that we would never put in a product now. And what's interesting is that it has nothing to do with any new data on those ingredients. It has everything to do with the public perception of those ingredients. So it's kind of the same thing. It's this like double-edged sword where now these ingredients are being left out of products, and then the brands are saying that they're leaving them out of products, and then it's just reinforcing this fear, and it's kind of this snowball effect that happens, which I'm not faulting the brands. It's what you have to do because the consumers are the one purchasing your product, and if they say they don't want an ingredient and it's easy to formulate without, that's what you do. And I understand it too from a legislation standpoint. If there's this small possibility that this could potentially be happening to the coral reefs, I also understand it from that perspective, but it's just really tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, maybe I have a little less like forgiveness for for brands or for legislation for doing that, because oftentimes reformulating these things are not easy, and it's giving cosmetic chemists a lot of like flack, and we're having to troubleshoot things that's just completely unnecessary, like completely against like what we know is to be true. And at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to succumb to marketing than to educate consumers. And because, you know, that's assuming that consumers want to be educated. And I don't know if a lot of them do, or, you know, some of them do. So, you know, I do think that brands need to be better about educating, but at the same time, science is not sexy. It's hard to make science sound really cool and want you to spend your money on it. But at the end of the day, it's not. So it's a hard reality.
I really appreciate some of the videos that you recently posted about like some science. I won't even call it science information because there's really nothing scientific about it, but it was just kind of trying to portray things to the consumer in a very, for lack of a better word, dumbed down way, but that it wasn't accurate. And I really appreciate your take on it, because I think we need to give the consumer a little bit more credit. And there are ways that we can educate from a digestible standpoint that's easier for the consumer to understand without making things inaccurate in the process.
Absolutely. And I think this really goes back to just like how consumers use their products in general. I feel like people, it's hard to talk about like scientific concepts in a span of like 30 seconds to a minute and 30 seconds just in reality, especially with how consumers' attention spans are now these days, especially being on TikTok. Like, I am 100% guilty of that. But it's also important to just kind of like dumb it down and be like, hold on, we don't even need to like talk about the science behind it, because like, is this actually true to how you use it? Like, we can kind of connect that way in terms of like, I understand because I am also a consumer too, you know? So just kind of like bridging that gap that's just the whole goal of my platform in general.
Yeah, I love that you use that terminology, because that's actually the same terminology I use. I always say I want to bridge the gap between the consumer and the industry.
Yes!
And I was reading your bio and I was like, she's got it. Like, I think that's what I, as a consumer as well, you know, I'm not in the cosmetic formulation industry. That's what I crave. I want you to bridge that gap from where my knowledge stands to the formulation perspective. So it's so fascinating to me. Okay, I have a couple more myths. One is that, along the same line, well, actually, let's start with this one. Medical grade skincare is regulated by the FDA.
It's not.
This is such an irritating misconception, and I get it in my comments all the time. And I'm just like, who told you that?
Literally, like, where is this coming from? And it's funny because I'm friends with an esthetician, and, you know, she had posted something on her feed, like, recently saying, like, this doesn't exist, and people in her comments are like, well, in drugstore products, active ingredients need to be at 7%, and in medical grade or professional grade, it can be up to 86%. And I responded, I'm like, can you link the regulations to this? Like, where did you get these numbers from? And of course she didn't respond because they don't exist. So, like, it's just so funny. But yeah, for context, a lot of people say that medical grade is a thing because they have better quality ingredients, they have a higher percentage of ingredients, or they have clinical trials to support. And all these are not true. So going back to the quality of ingredients, this is not gatekept in the industry. I could literally like share my screen and show you where to source cosmetic ingredients right now. And there is no such thing as medical grade or professional grade or whatever. The best that you can do is USP, or United States like Pharmacopoeia, what you would use for like pharmaceutical ingredients. But that's just like completely unnecessary and would often cost more than normal cosmetic grade ingredients. So definitely does not necessarily make it better. It just kind of shows that you might not be as financially smart with how you formulate or price out your products, honestly. The second one is that, you know, it has a higher concentration of active ingredients. And this may be true if you are, you know, selling things out of a salon or out of like a provider's office. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better for you. And I mean, again, you can put things at really, no, I can't say any concentration because there are some, you know, regulations, but I wouldn't use like a retinol at like 20%. My skin would fry off.
Well, we're seeing it with niacinamide right now, right? Brands are going higher and higher when the data really says between 2 and 5 is the sweet point. Why are we formulating at 15, 20%?
I don't know. In some cases it's just completely unnecessary and is not really a flex, and again, could just be costing you more money, could potentially be irritating your skin. And then the last one saying that, you know, oh, we use clinical trials to back that up. Again, that is not gatekept in the industry. Again, I could share my screen, share my contacts with you of who to reach out to do a clinical trial. This is not only subject to medical grade or professional grade products. No. It costs more to do clinical trials, like I will give you that. But again, this is kind of going back to the fact that if you are a medical grade or professional grade brand, I question how smart your financial decisions are. You know, like there are great drugstore products out there that have clinical data to back it up, and this is not only gatekept to medical grade. Like it's one of the craziest myths. I'm like, I don't understand. And you know, they make the argument that it's the line between cosmetics and pharmaceuticals. I'm like, that is that's an OTC, that's a drug. So you are now breaking the law. So like, there's no winning. It doesn't exist.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I always like to say, whenever I'm having this conversation, I am not against quote unquote medical grade skincare. I never call it that when I'm using it in my routine and I'm talking about it. There are tons, obviously, you know, I work at a dermatology practice. That's a lot of the products that I have access to, a lot of the products I recommend and use, but it has nothing to do with whether they're quote medical grade or not. It has nothing to do with where they're sold. Like, I can find you a product at Target, I can find you a product at Sephora, and I can find you a product at my office that are all going to do very similar similar things. They might be for different budgets. They might be a different cosmetic experience, but saying that one is better because it's where it's sold is silly.
I agree 100%.
So silly. Okay. One more myth here. What about parabens? That's another one that is kind of being left out of a lot of formulations now. And I'd love to hear what you think about that, because is it kind of like the BPA thing where we're just going to something else that's very similar, but it's not called BPA, just to kind of like calm people down? Or is it, what is your view on parabens?
Yeah, I don't think it's that situation at all. In fact, parabens are like a class of preservatives. It's not just like a singular ingredient. So like when you look at an ingredient list, you're not going to see the word parabens on it. It's going to be like propylparaben or butylparaben or whatever. No, I think they're safe, and they are not endocrine disruptors, which a lot of people say that they are. If you look at, the studies that say that they are, it's kind of the same thing with the sunscreen conversation that we were having. They are used in either high dosage, or they're used on animals, or it's not realistic to consumer use. And there are actually like safety, like they're not regulatory bodies, but there are like safety assessment committees that have talked endlessly about parabens, like the CIR, which is the Cosmetic Ingredient Review, or the SCCS. They have like hundreds of pages proving that parabens are safe and efficacious. And, it's just really a huge fear-mongering thing in the industry. And it's not like, oh, we're using a preservative that's just like kind of tweaked in chemical structure, and it's like basically the same thing as paraben. I don't think that's really the case. A lot of formulators have been turning to phenoxyethanol because that's like another like tried and true, but now consumers are really starting to hate phenoxyethanol. So we're like, good God, do you want safe products or not? Like now we're starting to turn more towards like natural preservatives, which are, I think in general, are going to be used at a higher percentage because they're just not as effective. And I feel like when people think of using like a more natural preservative, they're like, oh, we'll just, put out the same percentage as we would a paraben or a phenoxyethanol. And there's been quite a few recalls with microbial contamination because of that. So that's a real challenge for formulators nowadays. But again, just to put into context about the whole paraben situation, going back to almost like the fragrance argument, is that parabens are formulated, or I guess preservatives in general are formulated at like 1% or less in a formulation. And again, we're maybe only using a few grams of our skincare products. So in reality, you're not getting that much of the parabens either. And that's also assuming that it soaks into your skin and gets directly to your bloodstream. That is not the case either. It's like all these myths are stacking up on top of each other. But yeah, we miss them. We miss parabens. We want them back. And I don't foresee the direction of the industry going back to them, unfortunately, at least anytime soon.
It will be interesting to see what kind of continues to happen in that space. Actually, I was talking to Jane from Jane the Chemist, and we were talking about, she told me, and I had no idea, that Lush has like a separate, like for most of their products, they have one that has natural preservatives and one with like, I guess without preservatives or something, and it's called like preservative free or something, or maybe it's one that uses natural, one that uses traditional. But I can't imagine that Lush uses like a paraben or something like that, obviously. But it's very interesting, and she says it like has a label on there, and then obviously the shelf life is much lower. But I'm like, that's so interesting. Like, how can, I don't know. I just feel like that's a big risk for the brand to take on.
That is wild. I didn't know that either. And I feel like when brands try to flex being preservative free, I'm just like, that is not a flex. That just shows me that you don't really care about the safety of your products or your consumers. Like, why aren't we preserving things? It gets me so heated, Amy.
No, I know. And I'm with you. It's just, I think that we have to draw a line at how far we're going to indulge the consumer. And I say that as a consumer myself. We have to draw the line somewhere, and exactly what you mentioned earlier, instead put some of those resources into educating. Anyways, so one question I actually forgot to prep you for that I am kind of guilty of spreading this misinformation is that hyaluronic acid needs to be applied to damp skin.
I don't think that's...
School us on it.
I don't think that's necessarily true, and a lot of people say that, not even about hyaluronic acid, but just a lot about like skincare products in general, or that they could potentially deactivate if your skin is damp.
Oh yes, I've seen.
Yeah, we know. Yeah, and I really don't think that's, if anything, especially for your like AHAs or something, it could potentially maybe irritate your skin a little bit more if your skin is damp. But Hyaluronic acid, it's a humectant, and it's going to work by drawing in water from the external environment or from other parts of your skin. If your skin is damp, maybe in theory it could work a little bit better, but like it's the whole purpose of hyaluronic acid in general is to draw water from other places. It doesn't necessarily need to be present to be more effective. Like I don't necessarily think that to be entirely true.
And I think one thing people forget too, like after they're cleansing their face, even if they dry their face off, their skin is still moist if they just cleanse. Like it's not like you were able to rid your skin of that moisture. Your skin's always moist. There's always a level of water in your skin.
Yeah,
exactly. It doesn't matter.
Totally.
So something we don't have to worry about too much. Yeah. So what's next for you? What's next in your career journey, your social media journey?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I have still quite some time left in my PhD. I've maybe like 3 to 4 more years. A PhD is a long haul, so I'll be around here for a while. After graduation, I would love to like stay on the education side. Like I would love to, potentially teach at a university after this. We'll see. Still a lot of time left, but that's the goal for now. In terms of social media, I am not sure what's going to happen with social media. Like, this is something that I do for fun on the side when I have time. But, a lot of really cool things have stemmed from, being on social media. So, like, I'm really excited to see where my future goes there. Yeah, no huge expectations, but just along for the ride. Yeah.
That's the best place to be in when it comes to social, I think. It can open a lot of doors, but sometimes it's easy for your expectations to get the best of you and the whole comparison game. And let me just say that we're grateful that you're here and that you're educating, and I've learned so much from your
thanks.
content.
I've learned so much from your content. It's really cool. The community that is just built through education.
Thanks so much.
Awesome.
I'm very proud. I'm very lucky. I love my community. So another question I ask all my guests, what's your holy grail skincare product?
Ooh, of course it has to be a sunscreen. My holy grail skincare product is the Summer Fridays Shade Drops. I don't know if you've tried them before.
One of my favorite sunscreens of all time.
One of the best. I'm bummed that it's an SPF of 30. It would be so much better if it was like 50 or something like that, but I just love the texture. It's like the number one sunscreen that I always recommend to people. It's amazing.
Me too. It's one of my favorite sunscreens. Actually, someone recently just asked me, and maybe because I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head, but they were looking for a tinted sunscreen with similar texture to Summer Fridays Shade Drops, and I couldn't really think of any.
I think Supergoop just came out with one. I haven't tried it yet, but it looks like it's a pretty lightweight texture. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, I haven't tried it, so I don't know, but it looks similar.
Yeah. Looks similar. I know. I was like, I don't know what to answer because I feel like most of my tinted sunscreens are on the dewier side, where this is almost, it's almost like mattifying a little bit. It's such a nice formulation.
It's so nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What is your most underrated skincare tip?
Ooh, that is a great question. I guess it's to brush your teeth before you wash your face and do all your skincare. I'm definitely somebody who, when I brush my teeth, it gets literally everywhere except my mouth. That's definitely caused me to break out, around my mouth and on my chin. I feel like people just don't think about this. So if you don't already, brush your teeth before you wash your face and do all your skincare and all that.
Yeah, great tip. I love that one. And what's your skincare routine?
Oh, that's a loaded question. It changes a lot, which is bad and it shouldn't, but usually in the morning I usually cleanse with like a pretty gentle cleanser. Sometimes I don't, but depending on the time of the year, I put on a vitamin C serum, maybe a moisturizer, and definitely sunscreen. The sunscreens vary, but I've been really loving the shade drops right now. At night, I double cleanse if I'm wearing makeup. If not, then I just do one cleanse, do a retinol, maybe a peptide serum, put a moisturizer over that, and then we're done.
What retinol and what peptide are you loving?
Ooh, gosh. The retinol that I've been using recently was oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking right now. The Saatchi Skin one. I don't know if you've tried them before.
I have not. I've never tried that brand.
It's a really nice retinol. And the peptide serum, I've been using the Naturium Advanced Peptide Serum, the one that came out, I think, like in September. Naturium's the best.
They can't go wrong.
They keep coming out with bangers.
And it's just such a good, and it's such a good price point. Like, it's now that they're around, it's hard for me. Like, when someone's like, I want a drugstore skincare routine, it's hard for me to pick anything that's not Naturium, just because they have everything. They have have an option for every skin type. Like, I feel like it used to always be like CeraVe and La Roche-Posay, and now I'm like, well, the Naturium's version is like a little bit better.
A little cheaper.
I'm like, I have to like, I have to like force myself to not include all that same brand, but everything they have is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and last question. If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
Maybe just to keep an open mind. I grew up always playing water polo. I totally thought that I was going to go to the Olympics, and that was just going to be my whole thing. But my life turned a total 180, and I am arguably a lot more happier than I was before. So just keep an open mind and just continue to adapt and adjust to things that are thrown your way.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on. Ava, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy PhD student schedule to chat with us today. I'm going to leave all your information below so everyone can follow you, because the information is really, really top notch. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you
today.
So much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Of course. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode with cosmetic chemist Ava Perkins. She is really a breath of fresh air because she really, really values the science, the nuance of science, what the studies actually say. She has the mind to really evaluate the science in an objective manner and then communicate it to us, the consumer, in a digestible way. So I'm going to leave all of her information below. Definitely check out her socials because there's new information popping up there every single day. And I know that it's going to give you some peace of mind when it comes to your cosmetic products. And I'll talk to you next week, skin enthusiasts.